There are moments in life when the world goes silent, not because there is peace, but because something inside you has been shattered so deeply that even your own voice cannot find its way out. You remember that moment, the fall, the betrayal, the loneliness that wrapped around your chest like chains. They thought that was your ending. But they misunderstood one thing. They mistook your silence for defeat. What they didn't know was that silence is where transformation begins. There is an ancient story of a warrior who lost everything. His home burned, his name forgotten, his strength broken. He wandered into the wilderness, not to conquer, but to survive. Days turned into nights, and nights into storms. He questioned everything: his purpose, his worth, even the very force that created him. And in his anger he cried out, "Why was I chosen just to suffer?" But no answer came. Only hardship, only struggle, only darkness. Until one day, exhausted and empty, he stopped fighting the storm and listened. And in that stillness, he realized something terrifying and powerful. He was never abandoned. He was being rebuilt. Every loss stripped away illusion. Every failure carved wisdom into his soul. Every tear purified the fire within him. The wilderness wasn't his punishment. It was his preparation. And when he finally returned, he was no longer the same man who had left. He didn't need validation. He didn't need approval. He didn't even need revenge, because he had become something greater than all of it. He had become unshakable. Now listen carefully. If you are hearing this, your story is not random. You were brought to your lowest point not to destroy you, but to reveal you. You felt pain that others couldn't understand. You walked paths that others were too afraid to step on. You faced versions of yourself that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And you survived, not by accident, not by luck, but because something within you refused to die. That is what makes you different. That is what makes you chosen. Understand this. Being chosen does not mean being protected from struggle. It means being trusted with it, because pressure reveals truth. And you didn't break, you transformed. Now when you walk into a room, there is a presence about you. Not loud, not forced, but undeniable. It comes from everything you end up, read, and everything you overcame. People may not know your story, but they can feel your strength. And yes, it shakes things. It shakes doubt. It shakes fear. It even shakes the beliefs that once controlled you. Because the version of you standing here today is proof that limits can be destroyed. So don't shrink yourself. Don't apologize for your growth. Don't dim your fire to make others comfortable. You didn't come this far to become small again. You came back stronger, wiser, unbreakable. And now your purpose is not just to rise, but to show others that rising is possible. So stand tall in your truth, walk boldly in your path, and remember, you were never just surviving the storm. You were becoming the force that commands it. There was a moment when everything you thought was solid began to collapse without warning. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once, like the ground beneath your feet had been pulled away. You didn't even have time to prepare for it. 1 second you were standing in certainty, in belief, in something you trusted, and the next, you were falling into a reality you never imagined you would have to face. It didn't ask for your permission. It didn't. I care about your plans. It simply happened, and it hit you in a place so deep that words couldn't fully capture it. At first, you tried to make sense of it. You searched for logic, for explanations, for anything that could make the pain feel justified. You replayed moments over and over in your mind, wondering where things went wrong, wondering if you could have stopped it, changed it, avoided it. But the more you searched, the more you realized that some things don't come with answers. Some losses arrive without explanation, and that uncertainty cuts even deeper than the pain itself. People around you may have seen the surface of what happened, but they didn't feel the weight of it the way you did. They didn't hear the silence that followed you into the night. They didn't see the way your thoughts turned against you. whispering doubts you had never entertained before. It wasn't just what you lost, it was what that loss made you question. Your strength, your worth, your direction. Everything that once felt certain began to feel fragile. There were days when getting through the hours felt heavier than anything you had ever carried. The simplest things became difficult. Smiling forward felt forced. Conversations felt distant. Even being around others didn't remove the feeling of being completely alone. Because the truth is, some battles are fought in a place no one else can reach. A place where you have to face yourself without distractions, without noise, without escape. You started to notice changes within you, not the kind that people celebrate, but the kind that quietly reshape you. You became more guarded, more aware, more cautious. You stopped giving your energy so freely. You began to see things you had overlooked before, intentions, patterns, truths that were once hidden beneath comfort and familiarity. It was painful, but it was also revealing. The fall stripped away illusions you didn't even realize you were holding on to. There were moments when you questioned whether you had the strength to keep going. Moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing forward without clarity. Because it's not just the pain that breaks a person, it's the uncertainty of whether that pain will ever end. It's waking up not knowing if today will feel any lighter than yesterday. It's carrying something invisible that still weighs on every step you take. And yet, even in hat darkness, something remained. Something small, something quiet, but something undeniable. A part of you refused to completely surrender. Even when you felt exhausted, even when your thoughts told you to stop trying, there was a deeper voice that kept pushing you forward. Not loudly, not forcefully, but persistently. It didn't promise relief. It didn't offer guarantees. It simply refused to let you disappear. You may not have recognized it at the time, but that resistance mattered. That decision to keep moving, even if it was slow, even if it was messy, even if it didn't look like progress to anyone else, it mattered. Because every step you took in that state required more strength than anything you had done before. It required you to move without certainty, to act without confidence, to continue without knowing what the outcome would be. The fall didn't just take things away from you. It forced you to confront realities you had never faced before. It showed you what breaks you, what triggers you, what limits you. It exposed vulnerabilities you didn't want to see, parts of yourself you had ignored, fears you had buried, and that exposure was uncomfortable. It challenged the version, scion of yourself you thought you knew. But within that challenge, something else was happening. Something subtle, something gradual, something you couldn't fully see yet. You were being reshaped, not in a way that felt good, not in a way that felt rewarding, but in a way that was real. The fall was removing what couldn't hold under pressure. It was testing what remained when everything else was gone. There is a kind of strength that only reveals itself in moments like this. Not the kind that looks powerful on the outside, but the kind that endures quietly. The kind that shows up when you feel like you have nothing left. The kind that chooses to exist, even when existence feels heavy. You began to carry that strength without even realizing it. You also began to understand something that many never truly grasp, that not everything is meant to stay. Not every connection, not every path, not every version of your life is designed to continue with you. Some things are only meant to exist for a period of time, to teach you something, to shape you in a certain way, and then to leave. And when they leave, it feels like loss. But sometimes it's also alignment, even if it doesn't feel at way in the moment. Still, understanding that didn't remove the pain. It didn't make the nights easier or the thoughts quieter. It didn't instantly rebuild what had been broken. You were still in it, still navigating through something that felt unfamiliar and heavy. You were still trying to figure out who you were in the absence of what you had lost. And that is where the real struggle existed, not just in what happened, but in what it changed within you. Because once you see things differently, once you feel things at that depth, You can't simply return to who you were before. That version of you no longer fits the reality you are experiencing, and that realization can feel isolating. But even in that isolation, even in that confusion, even in that pain, something important was taking place. You were learning what it means to stand without depending on what once held you up. You were learning what it means to face yourself without distraction. You were learning what it means to continue, not because everything is okay, but because something within you refuses to stop. After the fall, there came a silence that felt heavier than the chaos that caused it. It wasn't peaceful, isn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that presses against your thoughts, amplifies every doubt, and forces you to sit with everything you've been trying to avoid. The noise of the outside world faded, and suddenly you were left alone with yourself in a way you had never experienced before. At first, that silence felt unbearable. You searched for distractions, anything to fill the space, anything to avoid the weight of your own mind. You tried to stay busy, to keep moving, to pretend that everything was fine. But no matter how much you tried to escape it, the silence followed. It showed up in the quiet moments, in the pauses between conversations, in the late hours when there was nothing left to distract you from what was really happening inside. And what was happening inside was not simple. Your thoughts were louder than ever, but not clearer. They questioned everything. They replayed the past, dissected your decisions, magnified your mistakes. You found yourself arguing with memories, reliving moments you couldn't change, searching for a version of events that would hurt less. But the silence didn't offer relief. It didn't give you the answers you were hoping for. Instead of, it forced you to confront something deeper. Without distractions, you began to notice patterns you had never paid attention to before. You saw how certain choices led to certain outcomes. You recognized habits that once felt normal but now seemed limiting. You started to understand how much of your life had been shaped by things you never questioned: expectations, fears, beliefs that were never truly yours but had been carried for so long that they felt like part of your identity. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant that the fall wasn't just about external loss. It meant there were internal shifts that needed to happen as well. And those shifts required honesty, and honesty that didn't allow excuses or avoidance. It required you to look at yourself without filters, without justification, without the comfort of blaming everything on circumstances alone. There were moments when that level of awareness felt overwhelming, because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Once you recognize something within yourself, you can't pretend it isn't there. The silence became a mirror, reflecting not only your pain, but also your truths. And not all of those truths were easy to accept. You began to notice how you reacted under pressure, how you handled rejection, how you responded to fear. You saw the ways you protected yourself, sometimes by withdrawing, sometimes by overextending, sometimes by pretending not to care. You realized that some of those responses were not strength, but defense, and that distinction changed how you viewed yourself. But the silence didn't only reveal weaknesses, it also revealed resilience. It showed you how much you had endured, how much you had adapted, how much you had carried without completely breaking. Even in your lowest moments, there were decisions you made that kept you moving forward, even if those steps felt small or insignificant at the time. You started to understand that transformation doesn't always look powerful. It doesn't always come with clarity or confidence. Sometimes it looks like sitting in discomfort. Sometimes it looks like questioning everything you thought you knew. Sometimes it looks like feeling lost while something within you is quietly being rearranged. There was also a shift in how you viewed others. The silence created distance, not necessarily physical but emotional. You became more observant, more aware of how people spoke, how they acted, what they valued. You noticed inconsistencies that you once ignored. You became more selective with your energy, not out of bitterness, but out of awareness. At times, that distance felt isolating, because as you changed, Not everyone around you understood it. Some expected you to remain the same, to respond the same way, to engage in the same patterns. But you couldn't. The silence had already started changing you, and once that process begins, it doesn't easily reverse. You also started to redefine what strength meant to you. Before, it may have been about pushing through, about appearing unaffected, about maintaining control. But in the silence, you realized that strength also includes vulnerability. It includes admitting when something hurts, when something matters, when something needs to change. It includes facing yourself honestly, even when that honesty is uncomfortable. There were moments when you resisted this process, moments when you wished things could go back to how they were, when everything felt simpler, when you didn't have to think so deeply about everything. But those moments didn't last long, because deep down, you knew that going back wasn't possible. Not because the opportunity wasn't there, but because you had already started seeing things differently. Silence also changed how you approached time. You became less focused on immediate outcomes and more aware of long-term impact. You began to understand that not everything needs to be resolved instantly. Some things require patience, reflection, and gradual change. And while that understanding didn't make the process easier, it made it more intentional. You started to value moments of stillness, not because they felt good, but because they felt necessary. You realized that constant noise had once prevented you from seeing what was really going on within you. And while the silence was uncomfortable, it was also clarifying. It removed distractions that once kept you from confronting deeper issues. There was also a shift in your internal dialogue. While doubt was still present, it was no longer the only voice. There were moments, brief but noticeable, where a different perspective emerged. A quieter voice that didn't criticize, didn't judge, but simply observed. It didn't offer instant solutions, but it created space for understanding. And that space mattered. Because in that space, you began to rebuild not externally, not visibly, but internally. You began to question what you truly wanted, what actually mattered to you, what kind of person you were becoming through all of this. And those questions didn't always have clear answers, but asking them was part of the transformation. The silence wasn't empty. It was active. It was shaping you in ways that weren't immediately visible. It was teaching you how to exist without constant validation, how to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it, how to process rather than suppress. You were no longer just reacting to what happened. You were starting to understand it, to integrate it, to learn from it. And while that didn't remove the pain, it changed your relationship with it. Because instead of seeing it as something to avoid at all costs, you began to see it as something that carried information, something that revealed what needed attention, what needed healing, what needed to be let go. And in that realization, something within you began to shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, steadily, as the silence continued to do its work. At some point within that silence, something began to change, not loudly, not in a way that could be easily explained, but in a way that you could feel. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, like a shift in the air before a storm. The same thoughts were still there, the same memories, the same weight, but they didn't hit you with the same force. There was a slight difference in how you carried them, in how you responded to them. What once overwhelmed you completely now only shook you, and that difference mattered, because it meant something inside you was no longer as fragile as it used to be. The pain hadn't disappeared, but your relationship with it was beginning to change. You weren't just reacting anymore, you were observing, processing, understanding. The silence had started to build something within you, something that didn't depend on external circumstances to exist. That something was your fire, not the kind that burns out of control, not the kind fueled by anger or revenge, but a steady internal force that refused to be extinguished. It didn't need recognition. It didn't need validation. It simply existed, growing stronger the more you leaned into it. you started to notice it in small moments. In the way you handled situations that once would have broken you, in the way you paused before reacting, in the way you chose not to engage with things that no longer aligned with who you were becoming. These were not dramatic changes, but they were significant, because they showed that you were no longer the same person who had fallen. The fire wasn't just giving you strength, it was giving you clarity. You began to see things for what they truly were, not what you hoped they would be. You recognized patterns more quickly. You understood intentions more clearly. You became less willing to ignore what didn't feel right, less willing to settle for what didn't align with your growth. That clarity came with its own challenges, because seeing clearly means making decisions that are not always comfortable. It means letting go of things you once held onto tightly. It means walking away from situations that feel familiar but no longer serve you. And those decisions, even when they are right, don't always feel easy. There were moments when the fire felt heavy, not because it was weak, but because it demanded change. It pushed you to evolve, to move forward, to become more than you had been before. And growth, even when necessary, can feel uncomfortable. It requires you to step into uncertainty, to trust something within you that you are still learning to understand. But the more you listened to that fire, the more it guided you. It didn't speak in words. It showed up in instincts, in feelings, in a quiet sense of knowing that certain paths were no longer meant for you. You began to trust those signals, even when they didn't make logical sense at first, because deep down, you recognized that this was different from fear. It wasn't pulling you back, it was pushing you forward. You also started to take responsibility in a new way. Not the kind that blames yourself for everything, but the kind that acknowledges your role in your own growth. You began to see where you had tolerated less than you deserved, where you had ignored your own needs, where you had stayed silent when you should have spoken. That awareness didn't come with guilt, it came with power. Because once you see something, you have the ability to change it, and you began to make those changes. Not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently. You set boundaries where there were none before. You spoke with more intention. You chose your actions more carefully. You became more aligned with the version of yourself that you were building, rather than the version you were trying to leave behind. The fire also changed how you viewed setbacks. Before, they may have felt like confirmation of failure, like signs that you weren't moving in the right direction. But now, they felt different. They felt like part of the process, like something to learn from rather than something to be defined by. You became more resilient, not because things stopped being difficult, but because you stopped seeing difficulty as something that automatically meant you were losing. You also noticed a shift in your energy. You became less reactive, less easily pulled into situations that drained you. You started protecting your peace, not out of avoidance, but out of understanding. You realized that not everything deserves your attention, not everything requires your response. That realization freed you in ways you didn't expect, because for so long, you may have felt the need to engage, to explain, to justify. But now, you understood that your energy is limited, and where you place it matters. You became more intentional with it, more selective with who and what you allowed into your space. The fire wasn't just rebuilding you, it was refining you. It was removing what didn't belong, strengthening what remained, and guiding you towards something more aligned with who you truly are. And while that process wasn't always comfortable, it was necessary. There were still moments of doubt, moments when old thoughts resurfaced, when old fears tried to regain their hold. But they didn't control you the way they once did. You recognized them for what they were: echoes of a past version of yourself that was still adjusting to the changes. And instead of fighting them, you acknowledged them and kept moving. That was the difference. You were no longer trying to eliminate every negative thought or feeling. You were learning how to coexist with them without letting them define you. You were learning how to move forward even when things weren't perfect, even when clarity wasn't complete. The fire gave you that ability. It gave you the strength to continue, the clarity to choose wisely, and the resilience to withstand what once would have broken you. It didn't make you invincible, but it made you adaptable. It made you aware. It made you stronger in a way that wasn't dependent on external validation. You also began to feel a deeper sense of purpose. Not necessarily a clear, defined goal, but a sense that what you had gone through was shaping you for something. That the pain, the silence, the struggle, they weren't meaningless. They were part of something larger, something that you were still in the process of understanding. And that sense of purpose didn't need to be fully defined to be felt. It showed up in the way you carried yourself, in the way you approached your decisions, in the way you viewed your journey. You no longer saw yourself as someone who had simply gone through something difficult. You began to see yourself as someone who was being shaped by it. The fire within you continued to grow, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that commanded respect from yourself first, and eventually from others. It became a part of you, something you could rely on, something that remained steady even when everything else felt uncertain. And as that fire strengthened, so did your understanding of who you were becoming and what you were no longer willing to accept. There comes a moment when the shift within you becomes visible. Not because you announce it, not because you try to prove anything, but because it can no longer be hidden. The changes that were once internal, quiet, and unnoticed begin to reflect in the way you carry yourself, in the way you move, in the way you respond to the world around you. And people notice, even if they don't understand what they're seeing. They remember who you were before. They remember how you reacted, how you spoke, how you tolerated things that you no longer accept. They expect the same patterns, the same responses, the same version of you that they once knew. But when they meet you now, something feels different. Not dramatically, not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that creates distance between who you were and who you have become. And that difference unsettles them, because when someone changes in a real way, it disrupts expectations. It challenges assumptions. It forces others to confront the possibility that growth is real, that transformation is possible, that the limitations they once believed in may not be as fixed as they thought. And not everyone is comfortable with that. You didn't return with noise. You didn't come back trying to prove your strength or announce your growth. In fact, there is a quietness about you now that wasn't there before. But within that quietness, there is something firm, something grounded, something that cannot be easily shaken. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry more weight. You react less, but when you act, it is intentional. You engage less, but when you do, it is meaningful. This is not weakness. This is control. And control, when it comes from understanding rather than fear, creates a presence that doesn't need to be explained. People may try to test it. They may approach you with the same energy they once used, expecting the same outcome. They may push boundaries, consciously or unconsciously, to see if the version of you they remember still exists. But they quickly realize that something has changed. You no longer respond in ways that drain you. You no longer engage in cycles that once kept you stuck. You no longer tolerate what you have outgrown. And that realization forces them to adjust, whether they admit it or not. Some will respect it. They will recognize the growth, even if they don't fully understand the process behind it. They will see the strength in your restraint, the clarity in your decisions, the consistency in your actions. These are the ones who will align with your evolution, who will meet you where you are, rather than expecting you to return to where you were. Others will resist it, not necessarily out of malice, but out of discomfort, because your growth may highlight areas in their own lives that they have avoided confronting. It may challenge dynamics that once felt comfortable to them. It may remove access they once had to a version of you that was easier to influence, easier to predict, easier to control. And when that access is no longer available, they may react. They may question your change. They may label it as distance, as coldness. as something negative. They may try to remind you of who you used to be, as if that version of you is something you should return to. But you know better. Because you remember what it took to become who you are now. You remember the fall. You remember the silence. You remember the fire. And you understand that this version of you is not something that happened by accident. It is something that was built through experience, through reflection, through decisions that were not always easy, but were always necessary. So you don't argue. You don't try to convince. You don't feel the need to explain your growth to those who are not ready to understand it. You simply remain consistent. And consistency is what solidifies change. Over time, people begin to accept it. Not all at once, not without resistance, but gradually. They adjust their expectations. They approach you differently. They recognize, whether consciously or not, that the dynamics have shifted. And with that shift, something else happens. You begin to attract different energy. People who align with your growth, who respect your boundaries, who understand the value of what you have become, start to enter your space. These connections feel different. They are not based on who you used to be, but on who you are now. They don't require you to shrink, to compromise your progress, to return to old patterns. They support your evolution rather than challenge it. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. There are still moments where the past tries to reconnect with you, where old situations resurface, where familiar patterns attempt to re-establish themselves. But now, you see them clearly. You recognize them for what they are. And instead of being pulled back into them, you make conscious choices about how to respond. That awareness is what separates your return from your past. You are not simply back. You are different. And that difference is not temporary. It is rooted in everything you have experienced, everything you have learned, everything you have chosen to become. There is also a deeper level of self-trust that begins to develop. You trust your instincts more. You trust your decisions more. You trust your ability to handle situations, even when they are uncertain. This trust doesn't come from believing that everything will go perfectly. It comes from knowing that even if things don't go as planned, you have the strength and clarity to navigate them. That confidence is quiet, but it is powerful. It doesn't need to be expressed loudly because it shows itself in your actions, in your consistency, in the way you carry yourself through different situations. People may not always understand it, but they can feel it, and that feeling changes how they interact with you. It creates a level of respect that wasn't there before, not because you demand it, but because you embody it. Your return is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about living in alignment with who you have become. It is about moving forward without the need to revisit what no longer serves you. It is about maintaining the standards you have set for yourself, even when it would be easier to lower them. And that is where your true strength lies. Not in what you say, not in what you show, but in what you consistently choose, day after day, without needing validation, without needing approval, without needing recognition, because the version of you that has returned is not seeking acknowledgement from the past, not seeking acceptance from those who cannot understand, not seeking permission to exist in a way that feels true to you. At this stage, what you carry is no longer just the memory of what you went through. It is something deeper, something integrated into the way you think, the way you see, the way you move through the world. It is not loud, not something you need to announce, but it is present in everything you do. That is the result of everything that tried to break you and everything within you that refused to stay broken. This power does not feel the way you once imagined power would feel. It is not constant intensity or unstoppable momentum. It is steadiness. It is awareness. It is the ability to remain grounded when things around you shift. It is the ability to respond instead of react, to choose instead of being driven by impulse, to remain centered even when faced with uncertainty. You notice it in the way you handle pressure. Situations that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable, not because they have become easier, but because you have become more capable. You don't rush to escape discomfort anymore. You allow yourself to experience it, to understand it, to move through it without letting it define your actions. There is a level of patience within you now that wasn't there before. You no longer expect immediate results. You understand that growth, real growth, takes time. You recognize that the process you went through did not happen overnight, and neither will the outcomes you are working toward. This patience doesn't slow you down, it gives you stability. It allows you to build thin G's that last, rather than chasing quick solutions that fade. You also carry a deeper sense of clarity. You know what matters to you and what doesn't. You know what doesn't with you and what doesn't. You know where your energy should go and where it should not. This clarity simplifies your decisions. It removes the noise that once made everything feel complicated. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions by external expectations or internal confusion. You move with intention even when the path is not fully visible. There is also a stronger sense of boundaries, not the kind that isolate you, but the kind that protect what you have built. You understand the value of your energy, your time, your focus. You don't give it away freely to anything or anyone that does not respect it. This is not about being distant or closed off, it is about being selective and intentional. You have learned that not everything deserves access to you, and that understanding changes how you engage with the world. You are more present in your interactions, more focused in your efforts, more aligned in your choices. You don't feel the need to prove yourself in every situation. You don't feel the need to expound to every challenge. You choose where to invest yourself, and that choice is guided by what you have learned through your journey. There is also a different relationship with fear. Fear has not disappeared. It still shows up in moments of uncertainty, in situations that matter, in decisions that carry weight. But it no longer controls you. You recognize it, you understand it, and you move forward with it, rather than being stopped by it. This ability to act despite fear is one of the most significant changes within you, because it allows you to step into opportunities that you once would have avoided. It allows you to take risks that align with your growth. It allows you to expand beyond the limits that once defined your comfort zone. You also carry a deeper sense of self-respect. This is not based on external validation or achievements. It comes from knowing what you have endured, what you have faced, what you have overcome. It comes from recognizing your own strength, your own resilience, your own ability to adapt and grow. This self-respect influences everything. It influences the way you speak to yourself. It influences the way you allow others to treat you. It influences the standards you set for your life. You no longer accept less than what aligns with your growth, not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. You understand what it costs to rebuild yourself. You understand what it takes to maintain that growth, and you are not willing to compromise that for temporary comfort or external approval. There is also a sense of responsibility that comes with this power, not a burden, but an awareness. You recognize that your actions have impact, that your presence influences the spaces you enter, that your decisions shape not only your own path, but also the experiences of those around you. This awareness makes you more intentional, more thoughtful, more conscious of how you move through the world. You don't take that lightly. At the same time, you understand that you cannot control everything. You have learned to let go of what is outside your control, to focus on what you can influence, to accept that not every outcome will align perfectly with your intentions. This balance between responsibility and acceptance creates a sense of peace that was not present before. You are no longer trying to force everything into place. You are allowing things to unfold while still taking aligned action. This balance is part of your power. It allows you to remain steady in situations that once would have caused frustration or anxiety. It allows you to adapt without losing your direction. It allows you to remain focused without becoming rigid. There is also a deeper connection to your purpose, not necessarily a single clearly defined goal, but a sense of direction, a feeling that you are moving towards something meaningful. This purpose is not based on external expectations or comparisons. It is rooted in your own understanding of what matters to you, what you value, what you want to contribute. This sense of purpose gives your actions meaning. It gives your efforts direction. It gives your journey depth. You are no longer moving randomly or reacting to circumstances alone. You are making choices that align with who you are becoming, with what you have learned, with what you believe is important. And this alignment creates a different kind of momentum. It is not rushed or chaotic. It is steady and intentional. It builds over time, creating results that are sustainable, meaningful, and aligned with your growth. There is also an awareness of how far you have come. You remember the fall. You remember the silence. You remember the fire. And when you look at where you are now, you see the difference. Not just in your circumstances, but in yourself, in your mindset, in your reactions, in your understanding. This awareness does not make you complacent. It makes you grateful. It makes you grounded. It reminds you of what you are capable of what you have already done, of what you can continue to do. And that reminder strengthens your belief in yourself, not in a way that ignores challenges, but in a way that trusts your ability to face them. You carry your past differently now. It is no longer something that weighs you down. It is something that supports you, that informs your decisions, that reminds you of your strength. It is part of your foundation. And because of that, you move forward with a sense of confidence that is not dependent on external conditions. You know that whatever comes next, you have the ability to handle it. Not perfectly, not without effort, but with the strength, clarity, and resilience that you have built through everything you have experienced, and that is what you carry now, every day, in every decision, Scion, in every step forward.